Thank you so much for choosing CAS TV. We always appreciate you. Welcome to the Conservation Conversation. My name is Chemtai Kirui. I'm hoping you're doing well. I'm really privileged to be sitting down with the CEO of Conservation Alliance of Kenya. He's not a new face. He's been in this program before. But this time round, I'm really excited to speak to him about climate change and specifically what you can do to adapt to the erratic changes in climate conditions that we are witnessing here in the country. Of course, you're going to go deeper and look at the projects that we can go through it and the policies that are there in place to support us and the efforts that we put in the effort to combat climate change. So without much ado, allow me to introduce the CEO of our studio. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure to have you join in because I know once you're here, all the information we need about conservation is sorted. Yeah.
Thank you. One day I hope I'll become the walking encyclopedia.
You're getting there.
Okay.
Steve, I was really interested in learning more about climate change adaptation, especially looking at the grassroots and the efforts that are being put in by the people on the ground who are dealing with natural resources, who are dealing with the effects of climate change from the ground level, and whether there are policies in place, whether there are resources in place to support them and to appreciate the work that they are doing. So okay. Probably first of all, you could speak a little bit about the acceptance of adaptation measures in the country, if it's there.
Thank you very much. You actually brought in a very interesting discussion that many Kenyans do not understand. When we talk about climate change, if you just take the word per se the way it is, to an average Kenyan, it just tells you that the rains are no longer raining, all right? And so the climate has changed. All right, so in a nutshell, that's what average Kenyans look at, is delayed rains, and they don't understand why the delayed rains are happening. And when it rains, it is so much, they don't understand why it is so much. And the normal rain season that they are used to have actually changed and altered over time. But the discussion around climate change started about more than 20 years ago. First of all, it started as desertification in terms of trying to reduce the space under desert, the land under desert. And so that's where we had the first convention that was looking at desertification, because in Africa we have, I think, the largest deserts, both in North Africa and South Africa. Then with a period over time, there were various predictions that if we don't take care of biodiversity, then it is ultimately going to affect the rainfall patterns, and we will see some delayed experiences in between. The meteorological department has always been explaining there are going to be delayed rains, but a lot of us did not understand what actually led to it. But I think now that we are faced now with this issue called climate change, I think we need to go back historically and ask ourselves, how did we get ourselves to this? Initially, we were told it's the developed countries that are emitting a lot of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide into the environment. And Africa then was considered as a continent to clean it up because of the rich biodiversity that we had in Africa. And that's where the discussion started. And for us, we focused in as Africa, particularly Kenya, in terms of then looking at it in terms of sustainable ways for industries to operate without really emitting a lot of carbon in the environment. But no sooner had we come up with a mechanism of how to do that, we were still thinking about the laws and regulations that we need to put into the country. And that then led to the development of the climate change strategy in the country, including also the climate change policy, and up to the Climate Change Act. So as far as the legal and policy framework is concerned to deal with climate change, we have that in place. Okay. Except that there are some regulations that are yet to be enacted, and it's one of the things that we are following very closely. However, we had also, the Act also envisaged the establishment of a climate change council. And that Climate Change Council is actually chaired by the head of state, who is actually the current president. He's the chair. The members of the Climate Change Council were gazetted, but they never met until the 3-year term of gazettement expired. The impacts of climate change have actually led to delayed rains, which means that lack of rain has actually reduced the water that was available to communities, livestock, and wildlife. And I'm identifying those categories so that I'll talk a little bit where the focus is, so that you know who is affected. In the process, we've also seen a lot of challenges now. Initially, communities would accommodate feeding livestock and wildlife with water, but now it's a matter of choice. Do I have enough water? All right. Do I have enough to feed my livestock, my cows and my goats? And if I have anything left, then I would feed the wildlife. And initially, they used to do that in the evening. So they would leave some water, then the wildlife would come at night when the communities and the livestock and the sheep are sleeping or relaxed. Then that's the time they come and drink the water, and then they move on with life. So the impact of climate change is actually real right now as we speak. And many communities are suffering. They can't access clean water. Livestock have died. We've actually lost huge numbers of livestock. Kenya Wildlife Service published that they're also losing a lot of species, about 45 species of wildebeest and about 11 elephants, together with so many herbivores in Amboseli ecosystem itself, based on the information that's available, have actually died as a result of climate change. In other areas, zebras are moving very close to human beings, looking for water, because human beings are the only safe custodians for them. And it's posing actually to be a big challenge. And so the balance that we have, is it the human being that you're going to provide water, the livestock and the sheep, or the wildlife? Yeah. Not forgetting that food actually comes from the land, and without rain, you can grow any crop. And that also exacerbates the issue of food security in the country. So with the right policies, but then now the impact and the reality of climate change is biting very, very hard.
Yeah. No, it's interesting actually the way you've mentioned the issue of asal. And here in CAS, I think in the news, they've been reporting a lot about the Pokot sides and how the drought is hitting really hard at this time. So I think this is where now we pose the question, what is going to be done differently this time? Because it seems by the last year we had a number of reported cases of hunger and famine as well. So climate change is here with us, and people are rushing, thinking, what are we going to do now? How are we going to survive this situation?
There are what I would summarize in terms of short-term interventions, and also talk a little bit about the long-term interventions. Like I told you, we need really to understand, how did we end up with this impact of climate change where we are at the moment? And I think that's very important. I think it's time to recollect and go back and ask ourselves, what did we do wrong? And from there, probably it will help us then address the issue of climate change in the long term. Two issues that are very critical. Right now, we are at an emergency mode, which can escalate into a dire situation if we don't deal with the issues right now. In the short term, we can provide water to communities. When it is dry, we can actually construct boreholes or water ponds, even dams, so that when the rains come, at least they are able to collect some water to kind of provide for the needs of the people and the needs of livestock. So in the short term, those are the interventions. As far as people are concerned, provide food, provide water. For communities that have diesel-driven generator pumps, provide diesel, because also the cost of diesel has escalated to to levels where communities can no longer handle that. So you provide diesel for them to pump water. And if water is lacking in another area in the short term, we can actually extend the pipes so that you don't have people walking long distances to access the water. There are also some areas where communities had solar-driven pumps. Unfortunately, at the time of need, the solar equipments have failed. So we also need to establish with the corporate sector how we can quickly intervene in those areas where solar was being used, so that we can reduce down the cost of pumping water and using solar. I think this is an opportunity to engage the private sector so that the private sector can replace the diesel-driven engines to solar-driven engines. Now, solar is not expensive. It comes with a big price, and that's why diesel is cheaper and becomes a better option. But also diesel contributes to releasing a lot of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. And unless you have planted trees to clean that, then you're also contributing then now to excavating the impact of climate change in the situation that we find ourselves in. So in the short term, also when it comes to livestock, provide hay for the sheep, and not for the sheep, for the livestock to eat, the cows. Sheep are proving to be a challenge to eat hay, but we also need to figure out what works for them. I have visited Garissa and parts of Baringo and Bogoria, and I think the Madenge species, the Prosobis, is actually offering a solution in areas where this climate change catastrophe has been very high. And some of the browsers, especially the sheep and the goats, are actually eating the Madenge species. That's what keeps them going. Unlike the earlier story where we were told that the Madenge species makes the sheep lose their teeth, but I think the sheep now have developed resilience and they're not losing their teeth, and the crop is actually helping. So let's plant Madenge species in areas that are very dry so that it can provide fodder to sheep and goat, and not only sheep and goat, also to some wild animals. In the long term, let's reverse our behaviors. Very important. We need to, I like what the President and Kenya Forest Service are working on in terms of increasing the forest cover in the country. But as we increase the forest cover, let's ask ourselves which type of trees are we planting? Are they the trees that are going to alter the climate by attracting rain to come, or are we just going to grow timber trees that we cut after every 2-3 years, and it takes another between 5 to 9 years for that tree to grow and mature? So we also need to. Finally, we need to protect our catchment areas. Our catchment areas are not areas to be played with. They are very, very critical areas. Water is not a renewable resource. You don't know how much water we have under, or you have under the catchment areas. And once it's gone, that's it, it's gone. And you can't manufacture water. You can't make water. So we are actually at the times where we need to look at how do we ensure that our catchment areas are well protected and secure and not destroyed. So in the long term, to me, the solution is let's go back to our habits. As far as food security is concerned, I would really urge this government, don't clear forests to feed people. Our forests are important and they must be left intact because they determine whether we want to have a regular rainfall season or we want to lose everything. So avoid clearing areas that are very, very significant as water catchment areas in replacement of agriculture. Agriculture, we can still do agriculture via irrigation. And so if we secure our catchment areas, then we can extend irrigation projects in dry areas. And the case example is Egypt is almost a desert. Israel is almost a desert. But if Israel is turning out to be the largest exporter of fruits to so many countries, including Kenya, then we have to change our behavior and our approach to the environment.